Hi, April. And all sixth grade teachers, this is a video to help you explain how to kind of go over the Passover question of the year. And the Passover question of the year is for sixth graders, what did Moshe say to Eliezer and Gershom, his kids, at at the very first Seder? And why does this work? So I'm just going to kind of take you through the slide deck here so you can kind of help explain this to your kids because it's kind of interesting. So first of all, I want to first explore the question, why does the youngest child say the Manishtana? Why not anyone? So here we go. So here are two kind of scenarios where the exact same thing is happening. A magician is presenting himself and all of this stuff. And in one of the scenarios, everyone is kind of bored out of their mind. In the other scenario, people are amazed. And the question is, why are one people amazed versus one people being bored? And really, the answer I want the kids to kind of get to or think about is, well, the crowd that is really bored are people that have seen this act so many times that they actually know what's going to happen, and the people who are really amazed haven't seen it before. So they're going to answer these two different questions. Um, and then they kind of answer and fill in these questions as well. And again, I want them to get to the idea of, like, when you see something a lot, when something feels very old to you and not new, it doesn't pique your curiosity. It doesn't make you start asking questions at all, right? If like there were burning bushes all over the place, Moses would have been like, "Hey, that's strange. There's a burning bush right there," right? If he lived in a place where he wouldn't have stopped, he wouldn't have thought that was very strange. But when he sees it for the first time and it's never happened before, there's something very weird going on. And so I kind of asked a couple questions here, right? If there's a family who went here, and I want them to kind of understand that actually the youngest child has the least experience with certain things in the world. So they are the least likely to have seen something over and over again, meaning they're the least likely to be bored. So if you wanted to figure out a way to make kids that were bored and amazed, what would you ask the magician to do? Well, one thing you could do is just make sure there's always students, always people watching who had never seen it before. The other idea is to have them do tricks that the person has never seen. So even though they've been to that event, it's as if it's a first time event because they're seeing new things. And the Manishtana questions, what I want to make the claim of is that actually the Manishtana are basically very people who have almost never been to a Seder before looking around at a Seder plate and being like, huh, what is going on here? And they're actually like outbursts of expression of wonder that they're having, right? Right. So question number one, right? So imagine this. Hi, Ima. Thanks for telling me to come in for dinner. I'm famished. Did someone forget the bread? How come there's no bread on the table? All I see is matzah. Where's the bread? Don't we always have bread at the table? Don't we? Right. Question number two. Can we pass the veggies and ranch dressing? What? How come we don't have spicy veggies? Where are all the carrots? Where are the cucumbers? No one ever liked these spicy. We eat, right? Are we just eating it because they were on sale at Costco? Question number three. I love this meal. We don't just have one dipping sauce, but we have two. But that's awesome. But why? Ema usually never puts dipping sauce on the table. And I thought we're having dinner. How come everyone's just kind of relaxing or reclining? If we're having dinner, how come we're not sitting at the table? Right? These are the four questions of the Manishtana that kind of come from a kid saying like strange things are going on. But imagine these same kids are no longer kids, but like our grandparents. Imagine they've been to 80 different Seders, right? And they know that today's Passover. So they're sitting and saying, all I see is the matzah on the table because it's Passover and that's what you do, right? All I see are spicy foods on the table, and it's because, oh, it's Passover, right? So all these people, when they're older and have been in this experience, they're not excited, they're not interested, they're not expressing questions and curiosity because they've been at this event over and over and over again. That's why we have the youngest child saying the Manishna, because they are actually the child that would legitimately come up with an authentic question. And surprise, surprise, if it says in the Mishnah that really, if a child asks a question, then you can really skip the Manishtana because they're asking a more authentic question about something that's weird and wacky at the Passover Seder. And if right. And so it's almost like the Manishana is actually the default. If no one has a question, the father kind of says, hey, shouldn't we be asking a question? The parent saying, shouldn't we be asking a question about this? Shouldn't we be asking a question about this or this? All right. So then I kind of ask the question, now imagine you're a slave living in Egypt and you spend your entire life being a slave. It's the night of the 10th plague and you sit down to have a meal. And on the table, you see matzah, you see maror, and you see the bone. So like as a slave, what are you thinking? Like, are these strange things to you? And I want to make the claim actually that they're not strange at all to a slave. right? A slave is used to eating something like matzah all the time. A slave knows that that bone was just used for the animal to put the blood on the doorpost. A slave knows that their life has been eating spicy and miserable and yucky food. So none of these really would be kind of questions for a slave. And yet we know that, and you'll see it in a second, that the very first Passover Seder that took place in Egypt on the night of the 10th plague. So what is the manishtana of that night? Right? Because all these foods are pretty much familiar to a slave child. They're not going to be asking questions about strange things. So I wanted to get at that. And then the real question is, well, why do you have questions? Really, you have questions so the parents can answer. And what are the parents answering with? They're answering about the story of slavery and freedom. So my next question: what is the goal of a seder in general? And you can have kids kind of ask this. And the goal of a seder is for a mom and dad to tell the kids the story of slavery and freedom. And it really does say that in the Torah itself. Like, then why do we have all these strange and weird things going on at the seder? And it's really so kids will stay awake, so they'll stay focused, and so they'll ask questions, so you can do your job as a parent. All those things are tools to help you get curious. So when was the very first Seder? And if they look at this, they're gonna if they look at this, they're gonna see that the very first Seder, and let me just actually fix that right now, right? So we should get a second slide here. And then we're asking the question after they read this, they'll see that actually the very first Seder took place in Egypt on the night of the 10th plague. And they're going to see that. So here's the problem. We said the goal of a Seder is for a mom or a dad to tell the story of slavery and freedom. But if the Seder, very first Seder happened when the Israelites were still in slavery, then they weren't yet free. That means they weren't free. So how could they actually talk about how they're free when they're actually still slaves? So that's why I kind of asked as what was the goal of that very first Seder? What was talked about? So if you were Moshe at that first Seder talking to your kids, Gershom and Eliezer, what would you have been telling them about? Because you're not telling them about the story of slavery and freedom, but what might you be telling them about? Yeah, so that's it. All right. I hope that makes it clear.